Hello chess lovers, welcome to the new video. So I'm gonna show you a game between the world champion Magnus Carlsen and Alireza Firouzja, or Firouzja as we call him, we that don't speak Persian or whatever language. I think Persian, they speak Persian in Iran. So let's dive right into the game because this game was really interesting. So it started with e4 and then e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. So we have a Spanish game, a common weapon in the hands of the world champion and many other world champions from the past. a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castles. So this is the main line. This line has been played for more than 100 years. I think it became popular in mid 19th century. Of course, today everybody plays Berlin, but before the year 2000, this was the main line. So we have b5, bishop b3, and now bishop e7 is the main line, like the orthodox stuff. But there is a move bishop c5. I think it's called Arkhangelsk or Neo-Arkhangelsk. I'm not sure about these names or variations. And common reply to this is c3. But there is another move, a4. So white delays c3. So I'm not explaining everything here. This is just a Spanish game. There is something much more interesting that I want to talk later on. And there is a threat here to take because of this pin. So usually to this kind of business, black can react in three ways. There are three typical ways. One is to push, the other is to defend the rook, and the third one is to move the rook away. And Alireza played rook b8. So it's one of the three typical replies to this a4 thrust. Now we have c3. So what's white's idea? He wants to establish a pawn center, a pawn duo, yeah? d6 supporting the e5 guy, and we have d4. Yep, so d4, a typical move in the Spanish game. Now, white has these central pawns, which are very nice. They control a lot of squares, but black is trying to attack them. You know, he lets white build up the center, and then he's trying to attack it from the side, from the front, in different ways, as we will see. Bishop retreated to b6, and we have an interesting move here. a5. If you look at this position, this pawn is attacked two times by two of black's. Oh, something is wrong with my mouse. Okay, it works now. I hope it survives until the end of the video. So two pieces attacking the a5 pawn and only one white's piece defending it. But can black take here? Let's see. Let's take with the bishop first. Now the rook is putting pressure and the knight is defending. All we need to do is chase away the knight with the move like d5, and black loses a piece. Once the knight moves, the bishop drops. So this is not good. Let's take the pawn with the knight. So if black does that, then we can sacrifice an exchange like this. Rook takes, bishop takes, and then we take on e5. And if black dares to take, he can resign. After the exchange of queens, there is knight e5 hitting two spots, f7 and c6. So both of these threats are deadly. So if white takes on f7, it will be a double attack. Yeah, a check to the king and check to the rook. If it jumps to c6, it will also be a double or even triple attack if you include the king. So black can't stop all of that. He's just lost here. So this leads us to a conclusion that a5 pawn cannot be taken. So the bishop has to retreat. And this is the position I wanted to talk about. What happened here? So white has a pawn on a5 and black has a pawn on a6. And there is one very interesting strategic idea. It's very far-fetched, but it's interesting, and let's talk about it. So imagine if you take all the pieces, so I'm not talking pawns, just pieces, all the pieces of the board except kings, of course, they cannot be taken off the board, and this, oh, why is my mouse not selecting? And this pair of bishops. So imagine if the players are left with only a pair of light squared bishops. What would happen then? Black would have this backward pawn which is on a light square and it is blockaded. So it would be a permanent weakness until the end of the game. The only way to get rid of that weakness is to remove the a5 pawn. But that's not so easy. But if you can say, man, there are so many pieces here, how is white going to force black to trade without changing the structure? Yeah, that's a good question. But let's see. Let's see what happens over the next 14 moves. First, Carlsen plays h3. So he prevents a pin. Why? Because this d4 spot is very tender. It is attacked by so many different pieces, by the bishop, by the knight, by the pawn. So a pin here would put tremendous pressure on this spot. So he protects against the pin. We had bishop b7 and we had bishop e3. This pawn was hanging for quite some time. Actually, it was not, because before bishop b7 there will be two loose pieces, so it was not possible to take. I will just show you. Here it's not possible to take because of this simple and typical Spanish game tactic. But now, after bishop b7, the c6 knight is defended, so black can take the pawn. But Carlsen doesn't care, so for the second time in the game he sacrifices a pawn. This time Alireza takes it, so it's a free pawn. But white has good compensation. After knight d2, knight takes, queen takes. We are a pawn down, but as white we have compensation. Let's see. Let's say black exchanges on d4. Looks logical. Exchange some stuff because you're a pawn up. But then we have this move, attacking the queen, an intermediate move. And if black protects, the diagonal opens up and he will never castle. He will never castle. His king will stay in the center forever. For example, check. Let's say we block. We just take on d4 with a deadly threat of coming here and attacking this knight for the second time. So let's say black takes, because that knight was dangerous. We just take back. And if he dares to take the piece, then after queen g5, there is a pressure here, and nothing can prevent the double up on the e file, with the queen also attacking e7. So this position is just lost for black. So he cannot really take. He cannot really take this bishop. So that means he needs to play something else. For example, oh, sorry, that was here. So he cannot take. So let's say he tries to block the diagonal. He blocks so that he can cancel. Then we just go to f4. We just have to go to f4. And even though we are a piece down, the compensation is so strong here. This e file is so deadly because what white will do, he will triple up on the e file, and also he can easily switch his queen to the king side, and this will be just a deadly position. You can analyze it yourself. Very interesting. A piece down. Sorry, we're not a piece down. Sorry, what am I talking about? So we don't have a material deficit despite one pawn, but we have tremendous control of the e file and pair of bishops, and also black's light square bishop is dead. I apologize for miscounting the pieces. Sometimes people don't know how to count. That includes me. Okay, so this was the analysis of the variation e takes d4. Instead, Alireza castled. And now comes this simple move, d takes e5. Let's check if, because now this diagonal opened, let's check if black takes. If black takes, then he improves white's queen, and now the queen supports this guy. So white establishes material equality. He is not afraid of this pin because of bishop f7. So that pin is not possible, which means black cannot take advantage of the e file and the queen being there and the knight being there, which means white regain material and he is left with these two bishops, and soon he can trade into that endgame that I mentioned. But okay, Alireza didn't capture here. He instead captured immediately on e5, and then we exchange on d8. Rook takes. Now we deflect the knight by taking on a7. When black takes, this pawn is now loose. We grab it. And look, we're so close to that endgame that I mentioned 10 minutes ago. So black wants to avoid it. He doesn't want to go to an endgame with these two bishops. He wants to exchange them because of this pawn. Because if you have light square bishop, that pawn is a permanent weakness. Because white's bishop can always attack it potentially. So black would have to defend. Of course, Carlsen avoided this trade. And now knight c6, knight takes, bishop takes. Look, all Carlsen needs to do now is exchange rooks, and he is in that endgame that I mentioned on move 10. Amazing stuff. I'm sure he planned this. I'm 100% sure he planned this, and he successfully did it. Look, rook comes to the open file. Black doesn't want to trade, but he cannot avoid it after this trade, taking the open file, and now it's inevitable. And here we are on move 24. Carlsen achieved one of his ideas. He had other ideas for sure, but this was one of his ideas, and he somehow managed to almost force black into it, to exchange everything. Queens, two rooks, another pair of bishops, and a pair of knights, or two pair of knights, or pairs, however you want to say. That's some mastery. That's some real mastery. I know Carlsen is not in great form, but when it comes to endgame and strategy, he's a genius there. Of course, he's not winning here, but this pawn is a pain in the you-know-what for black, because he always needs to worry about it. Whenever this bishop attacks it from here or here, it's almost game over. In most cases. So let's see what happened. Of course, he can defend against that, black, but he needs to be very careful. So he improved his king, and now f4. Good move. So some people will tell you, put your pawns on the color of your bishop. Some people will tell you, put them on the opposite color. In different books, different sentences. But what is it about? Sometimes you put them on your own color. Sometimes you put them on the opposite color of your bishop, and also you have to worry about which bishop black has. It all depends on the position. There are some general principles, but you have to think, you have to look at the position and realize what is here happening, what's happening here, sorry. So here it is very clear for experienced player that you need to put your pawns on the opposite color of your own bishop and opponent's bishop in order to try to avoid giving targets to black, and also to control some dark squares, so that this king cannot easily penetrate into your camp. So let's see, king e7, king f2, king d6, b4, important, preventing black king from advancing along the dark squares. You see, white is using his pawns to control the dark squares, and with his bishop and his king he's going to control the light squares. Let's see, bishop d5, g4, with the idea of pushing forward, as we will see. h6, we go forward, so we put our stuff on the dark squares, control, take more space, control more dark squares. You will see, just watch, this is a masterpiece. h takes, f takes, c5. Now don't make a mistake, don't take this pawn and give black the c5 square, from where he is able to exchange these two guys, and then he can target the a5 pawn, and he has no more weakness on a6. Actually, he can be better there. So don't do that. When he plays c5, just ignore him. King e3. He can take, he can push, but he's not getting the c5 square, the b5 b4 thrust. He's never getting that. So he took, black took, Alireza, white took, and now look, this pawn is controlling this square, the king is covering the central squares, and the bishop will eventually cover these squares if needed. And of course, the g5 pawn is controlling f6. So that means black king can never enter our position. At the moment, white cannot enter black's camp either, but white is the one who decides how the game continues. He can do some zugzwangs and stuff. So you will see king e5, h4. So you have to be careful here. If you go after these pawns, you let the white king target that a6 pawns that I talked about. Yeah, I mentioned the bishop will target it, but king can do it also. Look, king f5, you go, you think, oh, maybe I'm gonna attack these pawns. No, king d4, game over. The king comes here. You can never defend this pawn with this bishop because you only have two squares. That means that white king is gonna come to c7, kick the bishop, and then go to b7. No one can protect a6, and that's a winning endgame. I hope you understood all that, but that's for experienced player. This is common knowledge. But okay, if you're not experienced, this is your chance to learn. You need to do some analysis by your own as well, because you can't just learn by listening, but I'm trying to help. So g6 happened. Now bishop g4, controlling the f5 square. Bishop e6, and here we have an interesting move, h5. Black cannot take the bishop. If he takes the bishop, h6 wins because the pawn has a clear goal and the king cannot come because the g5 pawn is controlling this square. So that would be the end. So after h5, black has to take, otherwise h6 wins. And now we take, and here king f5, and now it looks, hey, Carlsen is losing a pawn. He's gonna be a pawn down in an endgame. Yes, it is true. But he's gonna lose this g5 pawn. And black will have a pass pawn here, which needs so many moves. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Plus, there is a blockade on f3 by the bishop, and there is a blockade on f2 if needed by the king. So it's not 5 moves. That's going to be like 10 moves to promote that pawn, if it's even possible. Probably not, because white will just put his king if needed. But when white takes the a6 pawn, and when he puts the bishop here, that's just, after he succeeds in that, no one is stopping the a pawn. So while for the f pawn it takes maybe 10 moves to promote it, if it's even possible, for the a pawn, once the a6 pawn disappears, it's just a few moves, and it's the end, if the king is not, the black king is not there. So that's the idea. After bishop f3, so I give you this pawn, but I'm going to take your guy. So if you take bishop b7, and that's a problem. That's a big problem, because the king can block, and this guy is almost impossible to block. Black played not that, but he went to c8 to defend the guy. Okay, king d4, and he is still fine here, but he has to be very precise, because white can never lose, and if black makes a mistake, he has to play very precise moves to survive. So now he took the pawn, which is fine, and now we don't go there yet. First, we control the f pawn, yeah, and the king. Let's see. King e5 was played, because if you go, let's go back. If you go to c5, then black can utilize this pawn with the king coming here, and then it makes sense. But you have to be smart. King e5, so you're there. You don't let the king. And now f5 was played. And now Carlsen changed his mind, because now he is one step closer. He is one step closer to the c7 square, from where he will banish the bishop and then attack. Because if he did that the other way around, it was not good. But now it is good. King d6, and here Alireza made a mistake. What he needed to do is king f4, to go here and try to promote this guy, so in the end of the long variation it would end in a draw. But he made a mistake. He pushed, and it looks like this is a good idea. You want to push, but no, you need your king there. You need your king first, because if you when you push, like that, then you waste more time getting there with your king, so it's not good. It's not as good. King e5 was played. Also, now you cannot do it, because if you do that, you lose the pawn. So that's the trick. That's another trick. So let's see here. Let's say you're trying to exchange the bishops, and then you have a strong f pawn. But white is not going to oblige. He goes here, and then he will take here, he will take here, he will control this square, and he will have a winning endgame. So that's not good. What was the only saving chance was to go with the bishop here. Why? It's not so easy to explain. It's a long variation, but let me show you just. Bishop b7, we attack the guy. Bishop f1, protecting this guy. So this is the explanation. I said it's a long variation, but this is the explanation. Not so easy, but the point is, you give one pawn, but you protect your other, so then you can both have a pass pawn, but white doesn't have two pass pawns. So look, bishop a6, f3, king e4, king g4. So we have a pass pawn, he has a pass pawn, and they even each other out in all of the variations. Of course, there are many variations here, not easy to analyze all of them, but trust me, this is a drawn position, an equal position. Okay, but Alireza had to find the only move. Bishop h3 was the only saving move. He made a mistake. He thought he can give the pawn back, but no. After king f4, king f6, he's in big trouble. Big trouble, because again this guy, the guy that was fixed there on move 10, is causing black headache on move 42, and it will cause him headache on move 52. It will be until the end of the game. Always the problem. Actually, it will not cause, because in a few moves it will drop. But that was the, how do you call it? That was the not the reason. That was the, I forgot the word. That was the root of black's problems. Yeah. Bishop d5, taking this square under control. If black offers a trade, you just go after the a6 guy. Again, this is the main theme. You just go to b7, and that's your winning move. So black didn't try that. He tried bishop d7, but now the bishop comes. Oh yeah, you might wonder, why did he let white get there? Because the king wants to come here, so this king cannot move. If it moves, you just proceed forward. So whenever this king moves, white gains more space. He wins more part of the board. So that's why this bishop eventually has to move, as it did. So here it moved immediately, and bishop b7, bishop b7. Finally, we're going to win this guy. King e6. First, we also always improve our king. We don't want to let black's king get a better position on us. So king d6, and now we can take it, because the king cannot really take any of these squares. So we take, and now you might wonder, what if black tries to trap our bishop? Because this bishop has no moves, you see. We can never attack the b5 pawn with our king, and the b7 and c8 squares are controlled. But after king e5, we have a simple plan which black cannot stop. If he ever prevents us, then he gives us this square. If he doesn't, then our king will control the c8 square from the d8 square, which means that the bishop can come out and we have a winning endgame. Analyze this. This is a good lesson in chess endgames. I recommend you to set it on a board or wherever and analyze it. So that's why black didn't block with his king, because of this king march. So he gave a check. King went to d4. So if we ever get there, it's a huge thing. So that's why the king cannot move. The black king cannot move. So bishop e8 was played. But now our bishop is free, because you cannot stop. With this bishop, you can control this square or this square from here. But you can't do both. You can't control both with one bishop. So that's why white manages to get out of that small prison. And then he just needs to organize this push. He needs to be careful not to rush, because let's say here It's not good to start immediately because then black can block with his king on this square or this square. Actually, just from here, it's a good blockade. But the thing is, you don't rush. You don't rush. First, you improve all the pieces. Bishop f3, bishop c8. And now you touch him here. If he defends from the corner, he is in Zugzwang. After bishop d3, either the bishop will move and the pawn will drop, or the king will move and the c5 square will be abandoned. So that's not good. So black defended from this side, but now we have Zugzwang, bishop d3, and also just want to improve our bishop to come here and control this diagonal, because that's a winning plan. If bishop e8, a simple bishop e4 is winning, but bishop c6 was played, and now it's even worse, because after bishop e4 we come with a tempo to this diagonal. Black can never exchange the bishops because the pawn endgame is lost, and so that means he needs to, I don't know, move. But now we are ready to push, because this is different story. In this position there is no blockade. This guy is going to drop. We don't just, it's important not to push this one too soon, because for example, let me see, let's say you go bishop c8, push. Oh, even this is winning. Sorry, even this is winning. Yeah, this is a winning endgame. But okay, so everything wins. All right. So what I want to stress here is that on move 10, Magnus Carlsen blocked the pawn on a6. And there are many ideas there, but one strategic, very deep idea is to exchange all the pieces except for light squared bishops, and then to play an endgame that you can never lose and you might win if your opponent goes wrong. And this is exactly what happened. It took 14 moves for the world champion to exchange all the pieces except those light squared bishops, and then it took him another 20 something moves to make a win out of that small advantage. Of course, his opponent helped him with some inaccuracies, but still, it was a masterpiece by the world champion. He is not in the great form, but when it comes to endgame, he's always in a good form, because he knows them so well, and he's just a genius when it comes to endgames. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you enjoyed it first and foremost. Thank you for watching, and see you again. Bye!